I'm gonna obviously improvise just a little bit, and you guys in law enforcement, you know anything about improvising? There you go. Well, listen, thank you so much for having me here. I got some prepared remarks that I'd like to share with you, but before I get into my prepared remarks, we have such a change in dynamics in our country with immigration, such a big matter. Certainly Houston being a recipient or a place where immigration is a sensitive issue. I just came back from Honduras a couple of weeks ago. I went up there doing some consulting work for a company out of DC on security matters, and I mentioned Honduras because Central America plays such a big role in our community as well. When we had the latest surge during the summer, we ended up with about 1,500 kids from Honduras here in the Houston area, specifically in the school district of Houston. Gangs are a horrific problem in Honduras. The murder rate is the highest capital in the world. Drug trafficking is horrific, so there's a tremendous amount of influence. So there's a lot of things to be concerned about with our communities. I'm not going to talk too much about that today. I'll talk about the immigration issue, but I wanted to bring that and put that on the table because I think it's something that we need to take a look at in the future in terms of how it impacts our community, how it impacts our schools, and certainly our youth. But let me get back to my prepared remarks. My name is Hipolito Acosta, as was mentioned by Jesus, and I want to thank you for inviting me for this conference today. I'm honored, and before we begin my presentation, let me share with you how grateful I am our educational opportunities and all who work so diligently to educate our youth. Whatever role each one of you may play in that endeavor, my sincere appreciation because I know it's meant a lot to me. It was never lost on me when I headed our agency's operations throughout Latin America and the Caribbean while I was assigned to the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City that it was because of dedicated educators and role models, as well as being born in the best country in the world, that made it possible for somebody from an extremely poor background like myself to rise through the ranks and become a senior level official with the Department of Justice, as well as representing our country in a senior diplomatic role outside the United States. As was mentioned briefly, my background is enforcement. I started in the enforcement branch of the U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service, and I was in that profession, and I had the honor of serving in that profession for almost 30 years, starting with the U.S. Border Patrol on the southwest border. This was followed by service in the interior cities of the United States, as well as serving at 4 U.S. diplomatic missions outside the country for almost 13 years, and finished my career as the District Director of the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service here in Houston, Texas. Today, I'd like to first give you a brief summary of my background, where I've been, how I got there, followed by sharing some of my experiences with you that include starting out on the front line with the U.S. border, along the U.S.-Mexico border, serving in the Midwest for a number of years, infiltrating counterfeit document and vending rings, as well as human smuggling organizations inside and outside the United States. Some of these stories, as was mentioned by Jesus, you will find in my book, The Shadow Catcher, and others will be told in subsequent rounds. I'd like to start out by talking about a little bit about where I come from. I started out, I'm originally from Presidio, Texas. That's God's country. Doesn't sound very convincing, huh? It's a beautiful place. I grew up in a small town called Redford, Texas, and I spent 4 years in the U.S. Navy, joining when I was 17 years of age. I spent 4 years in the U.S. Navy and subsequently joined the U.S. Border Patrol in Marfa, and I ended up moving on to Chicago, Illinois as a criminal investigator. That's what became special agents. And while enforcement was the main background that I had, there's many other aspects of immigration that I had the opportunity to participate in, such as being the assistant officer in charge at Fort McCoy, Wisconsin, when we had a surge of over 125,000 Cubans that flooded the shores of Florida back in 1980. I'm sure you guys heard the word surge recently, but we've had those surges for many years. And I participated in processing refugees in the camps in the Philippines, in South Vietnam, I worked in the orderly departure program for children that were emigrations in Southeast Asia. I served as the officer in charge of the INS team on board the U.S. Hospital ship Comfort when we interdicted over 25,000 Haitians that were fleeing. And I headed up operations in Brownsville when we had a surge back in 1988 when we were receiving over 1,000 people a day coming in from Central America, similar to what happened during this past summer. As far as the undercover operations, I had many operations throughout the year, but one of the things that I want to say is that I had an opportunity to work all over the United States and outside the country. But let me take you back when I transferred to Chicago. I found it very frustrating to participate in arrests back in those years as an agent, arresting individuals who had been smuggled from the southern border to Chicago, process them, initiate removal proceedings while the smugglers were generally allowed to plead guilty to misdemeanor offenses. While the low-level drivers faced some form of judicial action, the heads of the smuggling organizations were for the most part safe in Mexico or along our southern border. Our tactics in enforcement and pursuing them were for the most part, very candidly, very stale and ineffective. Although I was a new agent with limited experience, I for one wanted a more effective strategy. Luckily for me, I feel I have been selected to the right place for the right assignment as we would soon be undertaking missions that had never been done by our agency. Just a few months after reporting to Chicago, I learned our agency was investigating a notorious human smuggler and a counterfeit document vendor by the name of Newton Van Drunen, a Canadian-born American citizen. Van Drunen, who had done time being jailed in Mexico, had been suspected of killing two of his clients, and he had become the premier provider of counterfeit documents to illegal aliens throughout the Midwest. So brazen was Mr. Van Drunen that when he testified before the U.S. Senate, he was asked by one of the U.S. senators if he was the premier vendor of counterfeit documents in the Midwest, and he replied, "No, Senator, I've only sold about 100,000 documents. There's more than I have sold." Well, that was the type of brazen individual that Mr. Van Drunen was. Ironically, he reportedly learned the printing business while he was in prison for human smuggling. So that was one of the programs that was set up so he could be rehabilitated, and he became a master counterfeiter. Have y'all ever seen the movie Catch Me If You Can? I would pit Mr. Van Drunen against the individual in that particular movie. As a matter of fact, I was transferred to Chicago partly because there was a contract on my life. One of the individuals being behind it was Van Drunen. I arrested him the second time in Joliet, Illinois. I got hit by the car that he was driving in, hurt my back, and I still remember him quite often nowadays, even though he's dead. But Mr. Van Drunen was allowed with our wonderful system to go on furlough on the weekend after he had served 2 years out of a 12-year sentence. And he promptly escaped to Mexico and set up shop in Ciudad Juarez. And I had been transferred across the river from El Paso, Texas. I think our careers were meant to be close to each other. Ultimately, Mr. Van Drunen was arrested in Ciudad Juarez with $12.3 million in counterfeit money, and I had an opportunity to visit him in prison while he was in Mexico. But getting back to Chicago, despite a multi-agency effort, the investigation of Van Drunen had not been successful, partly because of the fear he instilled in his subordinates. He had about 40 distributors throughout the country. Informants who knew Van Drunen were generally not inclined to report on him because of the same fear. Prior to this case, I had absolutely no undercover experience or training. And all those of you who are in law enforcement, you know how important that is, but then again, you wing it sometimes. But in speaking with an informant I had developed shortly after my arrival in Chicago, I proposed that I move in with this informant and 4 other individuals from Mexico who were in the country illegally, and to my surprise, I was allowed to do so. The other 4 individuals had no idea that I was a federal agent, and for the next 3 weeks, I lived with individuals. I infiltrated Mr. Van Drunen's organization. I was one of his vendors on the street. All the while, I had a 17-year-old bride at home with a small baby who knew no one in Chicago and lived on the 9th floor of a small apartment on the north side of Chicago. So you can imagine, I mentioned that because I have been very successful in my career and in my life because I had a tremendous partner in my wife, and she's normally with me wherever I go, but I take a little bit of time to say how much I appreciate her efforts. We transferred nine times in my career, and there was never a question of when or how we're going to go. It's only where are we going to go next. But it was not easy for her, and I appreciate it. But despite my limited experience and time with the agency, the successful operation and infiltration of Van Brunen's organization gave me a reputation as a daring, innovative agent with access to our upper management, federal prosecutors, and a trust by other agents around the office. Thus, when I proposed that I travel on my own into Mexico to target a Ciudad Juarez-based human smuggling operation, my request was approved. Never in the history of our agency had an agent gone into Mexico to be smuggled all the way to Chicago, and certainly not alone. I'd like to take a brief break and share with you a video that was done in 2000 by ABC News Nightline, because I think it's important. It gives you a little bit about my career, but it also tells you what the immigration topic looked like back in those days. Can you hear?
Reporting from Washington, Ted Howell.
The people who weren't able to do it legally was turned into massive figures. Mexicans have, of course, been slipping across the border for years, but what we're talking about now is a whole new industry, as large, as corrupt, as profitable in its own way as the drug trade. Crime syndicates are charging exorbitant sums of money to bring people, first of all, from all around the world into Mexico, with the assurance that they will then get them across the border into the United States. There are, of course, no guarantees, so desperate would-be immigrants hand over thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars, only to end up in Mexican detention centers. It is a nasty business.
It has become the world's back door into the United States.
We have some people from India, Chinese, Iraqis, Sierra Leone, all kinds of nationalities.
They sell the notion that Mexicans know every little hole from the border.
It's almost as lucrative and far less risky than the drug trade.
International smuggling of men, women, and children is big business.
What was the largest fee that you ever done? They give us 22 people, and he gave $237,000.
And it's almost as brutal.
People being abandoned in the desert, people being placed in containers where they basically cook to death. This one don't care about human life.
Tonight, human contraband, selling the American dream.
The cat and mouse game between border agents and smugglers has become a fixture on the U.S.-Mexican border. Once again, here's ABC News correspondent Deborah Breaking.
Hipolito Acosta has been chasing and catching smugglers for most of his professional career. Now the head of the U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Office in Mexico City. The pictures in his office are from his days as an undercover agent in the U.S.
I will portray myself to be a smuggler at that time. This individual was associated with individuals that were smuggling Yugoslav aliens into Mexico, into past Texas, San Antonio, and New York.
He also posed as an illegal migrant.
When I was stuck in the trunk of a vehicle, I had desperation of wanting to get out.
Really?
And it's a very scary feeling. And to not have your life in your hands.
He was smuggled from Tijuana to Chicago. Did you arrest the guy that smuggled you?
Oh yes, I certainly did.
One of the most decorated agents in the history of the service, Acosta arrested many smugglers. This woman was one of them. Her career ended with her arrest and 18 months in a U.S. prison. We'll call her Rosa.
This is a business. This is a big business. This is a big money.
Let me ask how you started as a smuggler.
I had a friend in Mexico, and he had friends in the city that they were Sagrados, and then we went all the way to the border.
And he said, I could set you up in this business if you want to do it. Was it dangerous for you?
sometimes, and sometimes, other times it was easy because, especially paying good money to the officials in Mexico or in another country. They even go with you and take you.
These nationalities were Rosa's specialty, Indians and Pakistanis, because that is where the profits are.
What was the largest fee that you ever got? They give us 20 Hindu people. So we cross them, okay, very well. So the contact in Ecuador, like the system, how we move the people. So we give $237,000.
Rosa even traveled to Moscow for her work.
When you went to Moscow, were you working on smuggling Russians? No. No. The Hindu people come to, sometimes they fly to Japan, and from Japan to Moscow. Panama is the route for the Pakistan people.
They come to them.
Yes.
She was a link in an international system of people smuggling.
We have identified people always back to the originating countries like China, India, Pakistan.
Did people know that you were a successful smuggler? Would they come looking for you?
Yes, especially the husband. Because they said, that the coyotes, the main coyotes, they abuse the ladies. And I was a lady myself, so I won't abuse nobody. I took care of them.
But the smuggling business is a brutal business, where illegal migrants are put in danger at every step of the journey.
People being abandoned in the desert, people being placed in containers for long periods of time, where they basically cooked to death. A tanker that was retrofitted to put people inside the tanker, where it normally carried oil. People were placed inside the tanker up to 80 to 100 people at a time and transported for 26 hours. That's brutality.
And these people had no idea of the risks they would be taking.
I lost some people too. You did? And I regret it.
They were in a boat, and it went over.
How many? About 20.
What did you think when that happened?
I was in Guatemala. I was thinking in my mind that they were I'm gonna put them, maybe tomorrow they show up. Maybe tomorrow, but that tomorrow never came.
For all the risks, there are still desperate people willing to pay with a lifetime of savings and sometimes with their lives, because so many do make it across the U.S. border. It is still Matilda John's dream, even as he waits in this Mexican detention center to be deported to India.
There's a couple of important things on that particular video. Number one, the lady that you just saw, whose name went by the name of Rosa, was actually based in Houston. Probably doesn't surprise you all a lot. She had a major smuggling operation. I infiltrated her organization. We smuggled Chinese, Filipinos, Pakistanis, Indians. I participated as a smuggler with her, and ultimately we arrested the whole group, except for one individual who was a Mexican federal judicial policeman who we were working with on the south side of the border. But it kind of gives you an idea of the magnitude of what's coming in through Central America, South America, and as you saw in the detention facility in Mexico, those were the results when we were working closely with Mexico in interdicting people before they ever came to the ever got to the United States. You'll also notice there was a gentleman where I had a hat on. I think he was lighting his cigarette. We were at the parking lot in La Quinta in San Antonio. His name is Tony Cifuentes, and I had just taken a payment of something like $20,000 for some illegal activity that he was involved in. And he was the main guy behind that operation. We had never met in person. We already knew who he was. He just had no idea we knew. But because he trusted us by that particular time, he came into the parking lot to make sure that the transactions went well. And I mentioned to him, I said, Tony, it's really great to meet you. I said, I've been trying to get to know you, to introduce myself. He said, no, I just wanted to be careful. He says, but I know that you guys are not feds because I can smell those bastards a mile away. So anyway, the following week, he was arrested. Now, going back to my days in Chicago, the first time that I got smuggled from Ciudad Juarez to Chicago, that was the first time that, as I mentioned earlier, that an agent had actually gone into Mexico. We had agents going to Mexico, but not to be smuggled like I was, because I was trying to meet with the guys who were actually the heads of the organization, and I was successful in doing so. But perhaps it was fate that put me in the path. As a driver of the U-Haul, we were being transported and got lost in North Texas during a snowstorm and had thoughts of abandoning the human cargo in the back, which included several minor children. My being there possibly prevented a tragedy similar to what occurred in Victoria, Texas, many years later, when 19 migrants died in the back of a tractor trailer after being abandoned by the driver. You all might recall that in 2002. My undercover operations continued in Chicago, including another journey that resulted in me being smuggled from Tijuana, Baja California, Mexico to Chicago, where I was forced in the trunk of a 1968 Nova with a 16-year-old young man from El Salvador that was headed to San Francisco looking for his parents. Now, I mention this because this is back in 1981, and he was coming to the United States in search of his parents. Does that sound similar to what we had recently during the border search? Children coming to the United States. So this has been going on for many years. Other cases that I worked on included working undercover in the largest heroin case up to that time in Chicago for a hand-to-hand transaction. I arrested dozens of counterfeit document vendors and ultimately was transferred to El Paso, Texas because of the alleged threats on my life. While moving up through the management ranks, I continued initiating, performing, and supervising undercover criminal investigations throughout the United States, Latin America, and the Caribbean. While I will not go into other successful operations because of the time limitations, before moving on, I would like to mention two that were specifically significant for our agency and for our country. I have been successful in getting Mexico-based smugglers prosecuted in the United States, generally by convincing them to meet me on our side of the border. But in 1997, I took it one step further by going into Nicaragua. Working with their Interpol branch, I successfully brought to our country two major human smugglers who felt they were beyond the reach of U.S. law enforcement and had never set foot in the United States. This operation would have a major impact on our efforts in going after heads of human smuggling operations throughout the Western Hemisphere. Captains and crews of ships used for large-scale operations found themselves before U.S. tribunals, including one case where more than 200 Chinese were being smuggled to the United States. Prosecutions were not limited to U.S. courts as we worked closely with foreign governments in using their laws to go after these criminals. In a 12-country initiative that I led, which was called Operation Crossroads International, while I was the district director at the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City, 7,981 intended illegal migrants were interdicted before they reached the U.S. border and returned safely to their country. This is especially important because the operation resulted in removing from harm's way many of those en route to the United States and the successful prosecution of those behind these operations. The second one that I want to mention was my final undercover operation in 1998, 23 years after I had started as a federal law enforcement officer and when my own son, who had been a few months old in Chicago, was himself a U.S. Border Patrol agent. I oversaw or saw me working throughout Latin America and the Caribbean, posing as a Mexican rancher with a private jet. The case, described in a press conference by our commissioner and the U.S. Attorney General as the biggest one in our history, was significant, as well as this was the first case that our agency had used money laundering statutes in going after the head of the enterprise, and that was the first wiretap case that had been led by our agency. I'd like to switch gears just a little bit because I want to talk about the immigration topic today, because I know it has an impact on what you do each and every day in our communities. I enjoy talking about my career, but I believe our country needs open and frank discussions on immigration, and I hope I have a little bit of time left over to get some of your opinions or questions about this important matter. I worked on this matter for 30 years, and hopefully some of my experience can be useful in some of the things that our country does in the future. As most of us know, the topic is and will continue to be a huge polarizing issue in our country, and one that has a tremendous impact in your profession and our community in general. According to news reporter Bob Price, the Houston Independent School District reported an increase of over 3,000 students as a result of the recent influx of unaccompanied minors last summer. Was the influx handled correctly by our government in allowing the children and their relatives to stay in the country? Were enforcement initiatives started too late? And what is the impact on our communities and our schools? I truly believe those are very viable concerns and things we need to address. You all might have seen a few weeks ago the front page article in the Houston Chronicle that reported that the border surge of children was over. No more crisis, that's what the article stated. More than 60,000 young children flooded our South Texas border, but while the attention was focused on them, the reality was that for the most part, many of them had not been traveling alone, as the reports indicated. During the same period, almost 100,000 other aliens were interdicted by the U.S. Border Patrol or simply turned themselves in at the U.S. border because of a lack of detention facilities. The coverage and even some political leaders made it appear as if this was a new event and had not happened before. Let me share with you what I have been telling the media, our representatives, and the public. This type of activity has been going on for the past few decades. I mentioned earlier that since the year 2000, the undocumented population has gone from 3 million to 12 million, despite the increased border security and resources along our southwest border. Has anyone in our leadership figured out why this has happened? When I came into the U.S. Border Patrol, we had 1,800 U.S. Border Patrol agents. Right now, we have almost 23,000. Statements that play well to certain audiences are generally the response from our leaders, more so now than ever, when it is such a big political issue. Those statements include, we will not address immigration until our borders are secure or until the borders are shut. Another favorite expression is our immigration system is broken. Well, we need to address the immigration issue regardless of where we're at with our resources. We need to come up with a solution rather than addressing it in that particular manner. And let me be frank with you, I'm not a politician, but I will say this, our immigration system has never been broken. Our leadership has been broken on the immigration matter. But as we make those statements, in the meantime, illegal aliens continue making the journey into our country in search of a better future. They travel in overloaded buses, on the tops of trains, in cargo bays of fishing trawlers that you saw in the videos, inside 18-wheelers, and trust their lives to coyotes, as the smugglers are called, to cross into the United States. The notorious cartels, which we read so much about, crooked police gangs, robbery, rape, and murder are all risks along the way. Just a few years ago, 72 intended migrants were executed south of the border by the Gulf Cartel. For whatever reason it might be, I don't know. But the truth of the matter was that they saw their lives end as they were journeying to the United States. Reaching the U.S. border does not relieve their risks, as gangs preying on the tired and worn-out travelers often try to collect one more tariff. And in many cases, even in Houston, many are held against their will in stash houses as criminals try to collect even more money from their relatives. Even if they reach their destination, they are not secure. They need to purchase fake documents in order to gain employment, and even then, they remain at the mercy of sometimes abusive, exploitive employers. There is an answer as to why. As long as immigrants are able to obtain employment, they will continue to seek a better way of life. The Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986 was passed under President Ronald Reagan. The administration did not get it right then, and I will offer my opinion that the present administration is not getting it right either. The president's action today under the executive action does not constitute immigration reform, but it may force Congress into taking action on this particular issue. Interior enforcement was negligible then, in 1986, and the years following, and throughout the decades, and the recent executive order by President Obama is more of the same, thus repeating the cycle. While it will be a benefit to possibly several million individuals living in the shadows, it is also a magnet that will continue to attract those who can obtain employment through the use of counterfeit documents or simply through employers willing to take a chance on having an illegal workforce. There are other similarities between the recent executive order and the position of the administration under President Reagan. Then and now, the U.S. was not going to deport millions living in the shadows. So the question becomes, what do we do? And is there a solution? My opinion again is that the reality is that the answer is yes. There is a solution. The immigration system is not broken. It is our leadership that has to come together and do what is best for our country. I'd like to open it up before closing for any comments or questions you all might have on this particular matter. No opinions?
So what do you see as the next step that should be taken?
I mentioned that perhaps with President Obama issuing the executive order, that Congress would be forced to address the issue. I don't think that they will address it correctly to begin with, but the truth of the matter is that President Reagan in 1986 recognized, as President Obama does, that we're not going to deport millions of people in the country. So the question becomes, what do we do? Do we do one, you can call it amnesty, or you can call it reform. The reality is that amnesty it probably is not a very treasured word for anybody, whether a liberal or conservative, but there is a manner to address the issue through reform. And one is that people that enter the country illegally broke the law, and they need to pay a penalty. And believe it or not, entering the country without inspection is only a $500 penalty. So my proposal would be fine them $1,000 before even moving to the next step. Because now it's no longer amnesty. That crime has been paid for. Secondly, I think legal status should be earned in the United States. It should not be like in 1986, like under President Reagan, people were allowed to apply for legal status. What should be done is similar to what the president is doing right now, but to a large extent, if they meet certain criteria, to be allowed to work in the country for 10 years, no criminal violations, pay taxes, and be allowed to come out of the shadows. And folks, believe it or not, the millions of people already working here do pay to Social Security. It might not be under their names, but it's paying to Social Security. They pay a lot of the things that goes along with having a regular job. So I think bringing people out of the shelves is important. But you allow somebody to stay from the country for 10 years with a temporary permit, no residence, after 10 years, in my view, they should have an opportunity. And it takes away the thought that people say everybody needs to get in the back of the line. Folks, there's no such thing as back of the line. It's just a political wording that's put out there. Get in the back of the line. Again, there are certain areas on immigration law that need to be tweaked, especially in terms of temporary workers coming into the country. But if we were to do that, we need to couple it with one of the most important things that has been negligent for the past 5 decades, and that's interior enforcement. Folks, if employers are held accountable through audits and fines and criminal provisions that are already in the law, employers want to comply. I know because I've done a lot of consulting work since I retired, and employers want to comply. So if you enforce interior immigration law, it's going to happen. Employers are not going to take a chance. You know, I'll give you examples. IFCO Corporation here in Houston had some plants here in Houston. There was a raid in 2006. They paid a $21.5 million fine because of the illegal workforce that they were using. Now they have procedures in place. They're on E-Verify. They have training to make sure that their workforce is compliant. So those are some of the measures that I believe need to be undertaken. If people cannot find a job in the country, they will not come. The amount of money that's being spent by individuals to be smuggled into the United States, it's huge. I'll give you an example. Somebody leaving Ecuador right now, and it happens all the time, leaving Ecuador to New York City, they pay $20,000 in smuggling fees to get to New York. People will say, well, if they pay so much, why don't they use that money in their country? And that's probably true. But the truth of the matter is, they go to work, you have 5, 6, 7 people living in the same apartment where it doesn't cost very much, and they save that money. The Chinese do the same thing. Chinese immigrants coming to the country right now pay up to $45,000 to be smuggled into the United States. But look, we're the greatest country in the world, and people still see that as an opportunity. One of the things that I mentioned in my public engagements is that I had a chance to travel with a lot of these folks while I was working undercover. I was in the back of a U-Haul with kids that were in there, that their dream was to go to school, to join the U.S. Army. So I saw that firsthand. But at the end of the day, I think we have a responsibility in doing the right thing for our country. Border security should never be compromised. And we have the right resources along the border. Is it ever going to be secure? Is it ever going to be shut? Let's be real, it's not going to happen. But if people cannot find jobs in Houston, in Dallas, in New York, why would they pay $5,000 to get there? From 2000, we had 3 million illegal aliens in the country. Right now, we have 12 million, despite the increase in the resources. What happened along the way? Illegal aliens know that once they go beyond the border, that their chances of being arrested are negligible. Now, with the executive order of President Obama, what has happened, even if ICE were to conduct operations, worksite operations, there are some people that are not going to be able to do anything with them, even if they arrest them, because they will qualify under the criteria of the executive order. So it's a complex topic, and yet I think that there are sensible solutions. When we have 3,000 kids coming into the schools in Houston, it has an impact on you, it has an impact on our kids, and it has an impact on our educational system. Is it our responsibility? I think that we would say America is a very generous country, and I have seen it, I have worked it, I have met people coming to our country, but I think it's important that we take care of what we done here. Any other questions? I didn't mean to get it along with the dissertation on that.
I read this week, there's I think in El Paso and in a school in Florida, schools are going to require graduating seniors to basically become citizens before they graduate. What are your thoughts on that? Is that going to help anything?
Well, it won't happen. It won't happen. Again, the way that it's addressed, with the federal law requirements and state law requirements are so different than the requirements. But I'm glad you bring up an important point. You're talking about bringing up students. So I'll throw this back to you guys to see what you all feel. President Obama a couple of years ago signed another order called DACA, D-A-C-A, the Deferred Action Children's Act. Children that were brought into the country at a certain age when they were young, who had been going to school, who were educated, were allowed to get a permit to work in the United States and have been allowed to continue and get stateside tuition. So there was arguments that was an amnesty for the children. In reality, it's not amnesty, and it's not any type of status similar to the executive action today. So then it becomes for our communities. Do we want to hold back somebody because of the fact that they've been here for 18 years but have no status, but they've been educated? Do we want them to work, or do we want them to live in the country? Those are the social issues that are very strong. But making those requirements, I think, is not the answer. I think it's making a requirement across the country in whatever makes sense. I think that's the best way to address something like that. Anybody have a feeling about DACA, about deferred action? Come on, there's nothing is being recorded except for the camera here. So if there's any questions that you all have about immigration, by the way, one of the things that I do, when I was growing up, I graduated from high school when I was 15 years old. It wasn't because I was overly bright, I was a real nerd, so I think they wanted to get me out of high school, but anyway, I take a lot of pride. I was the first male in my family to graduate. My brothers had a very difficult time, so education is very important for all our community, regardless of the background, where the individual might be. So one of the things that I have done, even before I retired in Houston, I took a lot of time to sometimes go before with schools, speak to the children, motivating them. One of the things that concerns me the most is gangs. I joined a gang when I was 13 years old in Pecos, Texas. Has anybody ever heard of Pecos? Pecos, Texas was a very difficult place. We used to go with the migrant crops going from Presidio to Pecos, Reynosa, Fort Stockton. So we traveled all those routes. And I decided that I wanted to join a gang. So I joined a gang called the King Hawks. And I had the heck beaten out of me. And I say it that way because there's a camera rolling, but I had myself beaten the heck out of because I wouldn't agree with what the other gang members wanted to do. So I only lasted 2 days. But, it was one of the best beatings I ever took in my life. You know, so I mentioned that when I speak to other kids because it put me on the road to what this great country offers. I joined the Navy when I was 17 years old. I had 15 brothers and sisters, and you know, we come from an area that was very limited in education. But the thing that I like to always say is that anybody who wants to work hard in this country, anybody who wants to try can become a police officer, can become an attorney, can become a doctor. It's just a matter of being persistent. And I share that with the students. And I say that because if there's ever a time that you'll have students in your areas that you want somebody to speak to, you know, please feel free to call me. I don't charge for those events. I take a lot of pride in doing that. And if you guys don't have any opinions on immigration, that's really surprising, by the way. But anyway, no, that's okay. It's good that you have your opinions to yourself, so you'll feel comfortable. But it's important that we participate. I think we need to get a message to our leaders. Let's take care of the matter. I will close this out by saying this. I know that as Americans, and I said this the last time I was here, as Americans, regardless of our background, nationality, we always meet the challenges that are behind us, whether it's fighting a war, whether it's immigration, whether it's the economy. That's what makes this country so great. When I was in the Philippines at the U.S. Embassy, I headed up the crisis team at the U.S. Embassy in the evacuation of more than 20,000 American citizens, soldiers, and their families after we had a volcano eruption that pretty much destroyed a couple of the bases that we had there. And we transported almost 21,000 people in less than 3 days, taking them out by ship from Subic Bay out to Cebu, and then in C-130s into Guam. But it gave me a lot of pride when I saw that people would see a child or a woman that was pregnant and they would give up their place in line so that they didn't have to wait, and that's what America is. Well, I want to thank you for having me here. I combine my topic of immigration with patriotism and all of that, but you know, I'm retired, so I can do that. Thank you so much, I appreciate it.
Yeah. Morning. I know several of you have heard, I've recognized from our intruderology trainings and some emergency planning work we do. Today we're going to talk about Sandy Hook, and then at the end of that, we'll talk a little bit about some of the services SafePlans offers, but the bulk of this is really going to be lessons learned from Sandy Hook. For those that I haven't worked with, my background was military and law enforcement. I spent about 12 years with the State Patrol up in Missouri. And while I was on the SWAT team there, I developed some site mapping software. That's where you take floor plans, share with police, which is good stuff. I always view things in from the law enforcement side of things. Here's what we would do. Then I got moved to the governor's detail, and we had a governor get elected. And I went to look at their schools, and at the time, my kids weren't in school, and I really hadn't considered schools. I just viewed it from police mentality, and started to realize that the true first responder is the school. If lives are going to be saved, it's going to be the actions taken by the school more likely to save lives than police or fire. Not to fault police or fire, they're reactionary. So I started developing some plans and training for that school district. The School Board Association of Missouri contacted me. It snowballed. I've been working with schools now. I left the Highway Patrol about 9 years ago. SafePlans we work in, I think it's over 30 states now. We've done 3 statewide projects with all their schools. We work with some very large school systems and some very rural. We learn things regularly. I still volunteer in law enforcement. I moved not so long ago, about 5 months ago, to Florida, but prior to that I served on our school board back home. So worked with a lot of educational facilities. On the topic of Sandy Hook, you know, it's a tough topic. My first exposure to after action reports was formal after-action reports was the station nightclub fire. That's where the band Gray White was playing and 100 people died. I did the after-action report, was part of the team for the federal government that went in and looked at that. I serve on an advisory board for GovSec, which is a public-private partnership in the areas of military and security. That they asked me to do an analysis of Sandy Hook from a lessons learned standpoint, and so I spent quite a bit of time doing some research on that. That's what this is. Now, Bluff, that's a military thing that I've kept with me. Bottom line up front, you know, this is a tough topic. I'm certainly not trying to point fingers at anybody. In law enforcement, you know, whenever you have someone die in the line of duty, you need to go back in and look at it and see if we could do things better. Certainly not to imply the officer failed, but how do we raise the bar? So it's really with that. I'm certainly not trying to state that Sandy Hook staff did anything wrong or that law enforcement did anything wrong. But as school districts across the nation have looked at funding, have looked at plans and training, there's been a lot of reaction to Sandy Hook, and you know, people need to come to their own conclusion whether their reactions are prudent or not. So what we want to do is try to look at the facts. So there's two, in a broad stroke, types of failures that could apply here at Sandy Hook. And there was a failure. It's certainly not acceptable to have that many people die in an attack. A concept failure is a flawed premise or a concept. You've started with a bad idea and just made things worse. Application failure is, it's a good concept, you just didn't do it right. Could be both, it's not always either or. Concept for Sandy Hook was lockdown. Make the announcement, close your classroom doors, everything's going to be okay. Their application, the way they attempted to implement it, was standard operating procedures for still, unfortunately, a lot of districts across the country. So the lockdown concept requires a building-wide alert. It requires notification. It's really not an individual action. It takes the time and ability to compartmentalize, and it requires indirect contact. Those that have been through that intruderology training, we really emphasize the direct versus indirect contact. We're in a shared space with someone that wants to hurt us. A lockdown isn't going to help us no matter how well you do it or don't do it. They're there with you. But a short video clip here on the concept.
Move to the wall farthest away from any windows or doors. And turn off the lights. Now you are safe from any intruder.
That's the concept that we've been operating off of. You know, if you get the door locked, and then even if you get the door locked, what can we really expect from a locked door? We lock doors to keep people honest. They're not really that great of a deterrent. So the primary sources we start to get into our true findings and recommendations was the state's attorney. I've talked with family members, not all of them by a long shot, with several. You know, I've read the eyewitness testimonies. We relied on publicly available information. The public report is there. We reviewed hundreds, really thousands of pages of documents that supported it. A lot of it was redacted, but a lot of good information was out there. So we tried to sift through it to try to figure out, you know, some of the facts. But the public report is still out there. Once again, certainly not trying to diminish the actions of the staff or local responders. We're just trying to look at the facts. 5 core areas we're going to look at: general information, the background. We're not going to go into a lot of detail there. Physical security at the school, how they responded, and how public safety responded. So it took them about a year to get their report out. So when we look at November 25th, about a year after the shooting is when they really released some official information. There were bits and pieces that were official before that, but most of it was media speculation, and it just wasn't accurate. Nothing we can do about it, but I would really encourage districts, and this is where HCDE and the center could be such a great resource. As your districts experience an emergency, obviously, hopefully nothing nearly this significant, share what you can. You know, do that after action report internally and try to share lessons learned so we can learn from it. I mean, I realize I'm a vendor, you know, I try to do the right thing, but I get that we need to keep things compartmentalized, but from school administrators, try to share so that way you've got that information out there, because there was so much of a reaction, rightfully so, after Sandy Hook, and a lot of it's just misplaced. The background of the killer. No evidence suggests that the shooter communicated to others his intent to carry out the attack. He never communicated with Sandy Hook. There's no reason they should have saw it coming. You know, the FBI will tell you there's 4 categories of workplace violence. We break it down into 2, insider or outsider. Insider's Columbine, outsider Sandy Hook. Sandy Hook did not see this attack coming, and there's nothing they should have. Now, recently, there were some media reports of another analysis that said that there were plenty of warning signs. Absolutely, there were warning signs from Adam Lansing, without a doubt. Doesn't mean Sandy Hook had the opportunity to observe them. The shooter had an obsession with mass murders, especially Columbine. Those documents we downloaded, he had thousands and thousands of pages. He would do Excel sheets on how many victims, everything he could find. He was really fascinated with attacks. He obviously had easy access to firearms. And then the last gunshot was heard at 9:40:03. That's what a lot of this timeline is based on, because we know when the last gunshot was, and we know when the first 911 call was, so we're trying to fill in the blanks between them. That last gunshot, the shooter's suicide, is significant because if there's one common factor in these mass killings, it's that the killer does not have an exit strategy. There's really not a profile. They don't always want to kill as many people as they can. They don't always have different things, but they don't expect to survive, or they don't expect to get away with it. So when we go back to that locked door concept, you know, if killing people means more to them than their own life, it's unlikely that a locked door is going to be successful. So when we look at the killer's background, certainly in an insider attack, Columbine, threat assessment, behavioral assessment is critical. Look for the warning signs, report them. Intervention is highly successful. Insider attacks. Outsider attacks where the school has no warning it could be coming, we've got to rely on our plans and our training. So those plans and training need to be integrated into the school system. Physical security. So there was no law enforcement or security present in Sandy Hook. That was typical. It's obviously speculation. I firmly believe if we would have had a law enforcement vehicle parked in front of Sandy Hook Elementary School, he doesn't stop. That's expensive. It's a challenge, but it's the best thing you can do from the standpoint of true deterrence and immediate response. So try to get on-site law enforcement. So finding 7, you know, after shooting his mother, which is not part of this analysis, he drove to Sandy Hook Elementary School, parked his vehicle in a no parking zone. There's a photograph from his car. So situational awareness, you know, security awareness, understanding your environment, that's critical. Not suggesting that someone parking in a no parking zone should warrant a 911 call. It should not. But it needs to trigger just something. You need to go just, hey, why are they parked there? And the trainings that we do, we've been doing this analogy for a long time when we talk about situational awareness. If a shooter had to come to one of your schools today, you can't stop that. When would you want to know? Parking lot or front door? Parking lot. Front door or office? Front door. Office or hallway? Office. Hallway or classroom? Sooner you recognize a threat, the better we are, right? This was the parking lot versus the front door. No one bothered to look to see that he was out of the vehicle, and evidence indicates he spent a little bit of time there. Not talking, you know, over 10 minutes, but he dropped some clothes, he had other weapons in the car, he'd opened the trunk. So enough to where if someone just would have looked to say, is that a dad that some kid forgot their lunch, or is that someone getting a rifle out of the back seat? Well, that's parking lot versus front door. And that recognition didn't happen. We've been using this for a while. The military development, Jeff Cooper, as far as situational awareness, talking to your staff. You know, this isn't Homeland Security color codes, it's about your state of awareness and your mind's ability to do something about yourself. If you're in white and unaware of your environment, you're not going to recognize the car that's parked out there and the guy getting a gun. What we want is yellow. Good situational awareness. Prepared, relaxed, alert. So that's what we want to stress in schools. Not orange, not hypervigilance, not red. That happens when there's an emergency. And if we can stay white and be trained, we're less likely to go into that black, that system overload. But we really encourage schools yellow. Be aware of your environment. See something, say something. Don't be afraid to look for things. And, you know, on the governor's detail, when we train people, we call them JDLRs. Just don't look right. You know, there's something there. That's your intuition. And your intuition is really a powerful tool. So encourage staff to look for things, to report it, have that process. Again, not suggesting it's a 911 call, but yellow to orange is as simple as, hey, there's a car parked out front, what are they doing? I've stopped what I was doing just to acknowledge that there's something just a little bit out of the ordinary. Okay, it's what we all would expect. The dad is running something into the school, it's a backpack, I'm back to what I was doing, or what's he getting, is that a gun? Okay, now we've given ourselves a few seconds, so encourage that. When we have to make those decisions, We all would like for this top-down alert system to work in schools. Okay, if we have severe weather, we go to shelter in place. Staff don't have to make a decision. If we have a fire, we evacuate. Staff don't have to make a decision. An intruder response requires a faster response and a more unique response. They have to make a decision. So this Boyd cycle or OODA loop is that observe, orient, decide, act. Train your staff to where they can make those decisions. Once someone else can take control, wonderful. If it gets to where it's a top-down situation, heightened security, law enforcement's on scene, that's all great. But you know, we all have been preaching over the last 10 years to schools incident command system, ICS. Well, you know, if you don't know who the incident commander is, guess what? You're it. And there might be several of them there. So until we can get a coordinated response, staff need to understand how to make that. So the OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act. Observe requires that situational awareness. Then that front office person can go through that decision-making process. How am I going to alert people? What am I going to do? That falls back to training. But integrate that into it. So when we look at physical security in schools, it's a broad spectrum here. We've done this quite a bit. It started in Philadelphia, now we're working on it in Oakland, where we go in and we develop what we call security standards for schools. Looking at the different areas, from staffing to training to actual hardware. It's not the only answer, it's a piece of it, but some key areas from SEPTA, crime prevention through environmental design, that schools should really focus on. Natural surveillance, not against video surveillance, it's a tool, it has a place, but the camera's not going to tap you on the shoulder and say there's a problem, and it's sure not going to tell you what to do. So situational awareness, the human eye is drawn to light, it's drawn to movement. We encourage staff to have that situational awareness, that natural surveillance element, position staff, structure schools so people have some natural surveillance opportunities, will get earlier warning. Access control or access management, it's critical. I already mentioned the on-site law enforcement, that's number one, but then trying to regulate access. Access management, we'll talk about it at Sandy Hook, is a challenge. Once again, it'll keep honest people honest. And then lastly, that ownership of space or territoriality. Who's responsible to watch this? I'm not at all suggesting that it's worthwhile for a school to say, hey, your job is to watch the parking lot 8 hours a day. No. But you know what, if you've got a back door that gets propped open, if you have staff that have line of sight in the parking lot to say, hey, just try to keep an eye on things, and if you see something out of place, here's what we do. Those are the things we're talking about. Who owns that space? We'll go into schools, we do these safety audits, security assessments, and they say, yeah, here's a problem area, and one of the things we ask is, well, whose space is this? Well, it's nobody's space. Well, it has to be somebody's space. We have to have that ownership. Starts with your perimeter, works all the way down to a classroom. So finding A, physical security measures at Sandy Hook Elementary School failed to dissuade the attacker or adequately delay entry into the school and into the classrooms. The doors were locked at 9:30 a.m. That was not an automated system. That's an approximation. That was their operating procedures. When we talked about failed to delay entry, it goes back once again, no exit strategy. The door was locked, but it's not going to keep someone like that out. Killing people meant more to him than his own life, so he got in. At approximately 9:35 a.m., we don't have an exact second, shooter created a roughly 3 foot by 3.5 foot fold in the glass window next to a door to gain entry. This was accomplished by firing 8 .556 rounds. So he didn't shoot out the door, which was commonly reported. He actually shot out a window next to the door, and there's a photograph of that. So the door was locked, which is good. We want access control, but let's be realistic to our administrators about what that means. Let's make sure they understand that a locked door that's glass has limited value, and a locked door next to a full glass window, from a standpoint of a violent attack, has virtually no value. It's better than an unlocked door, but let's be aware of it. The perception was, well, if someone wanted to get in, they're going to try to get through the door, and that's going to give us time to alert everybody. Well, one of the flaws in their mentality was the person that was supposed to make that top-down intercom announcement, her desk was right there. So when he comes up and fires 8 rounds, who's going to sit at their desk and get on the intercom? My hand will not be up. Doesn't mean she's wrong. She ran, she hit. That's human. We have to have that in our plans. It's a bad plan. It's bad training. You know, we had unrealistic expectations of what a locked door would do, and we had unrealistic expectations about what a person would do in that situation. It looked good on paper, but in reality, it was a failure point. Not that that person sitting at the desk failed, they were human. We should expect people to run if they're being shot at. So what we want to look at is minimizing blast present a more secure image. So it's okay to do these security renovations in schools. It's important, but still realize we're working off of a concept of schools still have to allow people in. You can have the most secure vestibules in the world, but arrival and dismissal times, what do you have? You have a wide open building. So realize that you're making marginal gains. I'm not suggesting they're not worthwhile, but realize what you're getting. So we say if you have to have these windows 72 inches off the ground, I mean that for natural light. Natural light is good. All kinds of people can talk to you about the value for positive, for your attitude, for learning. That's great. Keep them a little bit off the ground. Makes it a little bit harder to get through. Shooting out a window and climbing over it is a little bit different aspect. If it has to go to the ground, keep it narrow. And then if it's at your entrance, we don't suggest all ground floor windows. If you got the money for it, great. Do a security film. If you want to go to the bullet resistant film, that's great. It's about 3 times more expensive. The security film makes it shatter resistant. A bullet will still go through it. You don't want to be on the other side, but then once the bullet goes through it, it's going to take some time to defeat that window. So it's going to gain time. Get police closer, get them there. So it also has great value from a standpoint of high winds for severe weather. Physical security also. They had one camera. It was part of a video intercom in the vestibule. It did not record. It was only for viewing. So if you do have cameras, make sure that public safety can bring that up. That could certainly have been a factor at Sandy Hook. At Sandy Hook, there was, you would expect, a lot of confusion about what was actually happening. If you have video cameras, try to get it to where public safety has remote access. That can really help. It gives police real-time information about what's going on. Is there one shooter? Is there 2? Where's he at? What's he wearing? Gets police in faster. And when we get to law enforcement response, remember that, because they did not get in fast or anything that is close to fast. Classrooms. All classrooms locked from the hallway side required a key. They did not require their classrooms to be locked. So they were wide open. Interior handles had no locking mechanisms. The door opened out, which is common. That's fire code. The door should, whenever open in the path of escape. So it opened outward. Classrooms 8 and 10. That's where the bulk of the killing. So 28 people were shot. 26 of them died. 24 of them were in classrooms 8 and 10. That's where the bulk of the killing. The other 2 were the principal and psychologist in the hallway. So they were unlocked. He had immediate access. So in that same hallway, all the classrooms had a 4-foot by 7-foot restroom with a solid door that could be locked. Classrooms 8 and 10 connected with classrooms 6 and 12 respectively. So they had adjoining doors so you could go into other classrooms. Classrooms 6 and 12 were also unlocked, and he could have gone into those. There's no evidence to suggest whatsoever that the killer tried to get into any classrooms other than 8 and 10. So there was a lot of media speculation about how he didn't get into other classrooms. He never tried. Classrooms 6 and 12 he could have walked right into. He never went in there. No one was hurt. He only went into classrooms 8 and 10. Here's some pictures of their doors. You can see not a bad vision panel really from the standard. That's a solid door, but it couldn't get locked. Because going into the hallway to lock it would have required the teachers in classrooms 8 and 10 to enter the same hallway where their principal and psychologist were dead and the gunman had just shot them. Much like that administrative assistant in the front office is not going to sit at a desk and make an intercom announcement. Who of us is going to open up a door to try to lock it with a key when there's a guy with a rifle killing people on the other side? It's not going to be me. And I don't think it's realistic to expect it to be a teacher. So we look at that. What we also see is the classroom lock. Once again, you just couldn't lock it from inside. Here on you also see the restroom locks. So restroom locks are on the bottom. Just a push button configuration, but they could have been locked. But that wasn't something that was by any indication ever practiced or trained. As a fallback position. If you can't run, we'll talk about run, hide, fight in a minute. No one would suggest let's run out in the hallway where the killer is. So if you're going to stay in the classroom, if you can't get it locked, you can tie it off, you can do other things, or even as a fallback position to lock the classroom door with the kids in there. That happened well after the killings, probably after Lanza was dead, but it didn't happen in classrooms 8 and 10. They attempted it, but it was just too late. So every classroom should have be lockable from inside. As a recommendation, and keep them locked. Even if you have a lock that can be locked from the inside, keep the doors locked. You're requiring the human element of getting over there to lock the door fear kicks in, moving towards the door is not a natural thing if you think there's someone on the other side that wants to shoot you. Run, hide, fight is the recommendation we talk about intruder response strategies as far as the training on how to deal with an intruder. It is a best practice. It's been nationally accepted. You know, when we first started doing it, and AHCDE embraced this, you know, a while ago, and I know many districts down here have. Late 2013, Department of Ed put that in their guide for high quality school emergency plans. Run, hide, fight. It's no longer just a concept. It is a national best practice. So once again, we talk about the level of contact and the location. So staff need to understand that. Indirect contact, locking a door, barricading a room is a viable option. Direct contact, shared space, that doesn't help. Location. Location is your ability to secure it, your ability to evacuate, and very important for K-12, your responsibilities. As a teacher, what are your obligations? Kids with special needs, reasons that one of those options is off the table. One of the options is off the table, okay, then it's off the table. But understand what they are. On the run when you have direct contact, you're able to, when you have direct contact and you're able to secure your location. So, direct contact, you have direct contact with the shooter or you cannot lock your area. This video clip is from Columbine. What you see here is a run, a mass evacuation. It's not structured, get people out. At Sandy Hook, the run option was limited. It did save some lives. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. Some kids who were in classroom 10 that ran were the only ones in classrooms 8 or 10 that survived. I'm not suggesting that if everyone would have run, everyone would have lived, but once he's in that room and you have no fallback position, in no way do I think that 6-year-olds should be taught to fight back or instructed, but those kids that did run lived. So once he breached the classroom and was in there telling those kids to run was their best opportunity to live. It's mitigation. It's your best available option. It's not a perfect scenario. Hide when you have indirect contact and you can deny access to your location. You know, I think we'll go over just some basic things here. I'm going to demonstrate how you mute that, and we'll talk. I'll go over. I know many of you have already seen these. We'll go over them pretty quick. When we look at Sandy Hook, the ability for impromptu target hardening was there. That door opened out. That's okay. We'll work around it. So a door that opens out, all that video clip's going to show is if a door opens out into the hallway, you have the opportunity to tie it off. There were not interior vision panels or doors on there that would have made it obvious to see. It's a different one. We'll see if this one shows up. That's the next one. Yeah, we might be getting a crash here coming up. Sorry. So a door that opens out into the hallway. Take a belt, computer cable, extension cord, wrap it around the handle, can hold it shut. It's better than an unlocked door. Get you active in your survival. Staff should understand that concept. If I can't get the door locked, here's an option. And even if I get the door locked, here's something else I can do to help slow the attacker down. We want law enforcement to get there. We don't want to have to fight. If the shooter's in the hallway, telling the kids to run to the hallway is not a great option. So let's keep him from getting in. There were no attempts for that at Sandy Hook. Well, we'll talk while I was trying to recover. So other options on impromptu target hardening. The thing what we want to see, there we go, is, you know, embrace your inner MacGyver. Talk to your staff about what works. There's no one magic solution. If the door has a lot of vision panels, you might not be able to tie it off. Maybe you can use a chair, stick it in there to barricade it. Doors like that, you can tie off the hinges at the top. You can tie the vertical pulls together to keep it from opening up. It's just trying to slow it down. It's impromptu. You're trying to say, look, what can we do to allow police to get here and intervene to give us just a little bit longer of a window to survive? So let's not just be reliant upon a lock. Let's get people up and active so they're more likely to survive. This video clip here, you can take a chair. It depends on the door. Most door handles that work like that have the handicap lever. Depends on the type of door, depends on the chair. These are things that should be practiced in advance. The time to try these things out is not when something really bad is happening. So it forms a nice tight seal. One of the problems in a lot of classrooms is going to be your vision panels. So if that chair is in there, and I know that video's popping out, I don't want to try to stop it, but you get the chair handle in there. Once it's there, it's a nice tight seal. If someone pops out that vision panel, they're going to be able to defeat that and gain entry into the classroom. They are. That's where talking to staff about the fight as a last resort makes sense to them. Okay, you've tried to protect your classroom, they're starting to come in. Do you have to allow someone to reach through that vision panel and open your door? You do not. It's choosing your battleground. It's horrible that you have to fight back, but do you have a better opportunity to survive when someone is trying to reach through with a non-gun hand to grab a door handle, or let them come into your classroom with a gun where you're totally vulnerable? We would obviously prefer neither is required, but that's when we talk about a last resort. That's when it's needed. Okay, we can lock the door, we can barricade the door. If that fails, fight back there if you have to. Don't allow him to come into the room, because he's got a much greater advantage. So fight is a last resort. You fight when you have direct contact, and you cannot escape or run, and you're afraid for your life or the life of someone else. That's when we fight back. If we have other options, we do it. So if you get people out of there, if you can keep them getting to you, if you're not afraid, all those things come into play, but that's when we don't fight. What we feel like is that run, hide, fight, the run and hide portion greatly enhance the lockdown concept that is just dependent upon indirect contact, top-down control, so it gives people more opportunities to survive by doing that. We do not recommend for K-12 that the fight option be taught to students. It's a local decision. That's our approach for it, but certainly we recommend that you talk to your administrators about the run, hide, fight options. So now we're back to the report on communications. So communications failed to provide adequate notification to the occupants. They didn't know what was going on. First 911 call was received. We don't know that that's exactly 39 seconds after the doors were locked, because we don't know exactly the second the doors were locked, but we know when he committed suicide, we know when the first 911 call. A lot of the other stuff is just speculation. There was no formal school-wide announcement. There was an intercom that was inadvertently turned on in the main office, and the person said it was by accident. It might have provided some information. Some people felt it was helpful, but there was no intercom announcement of, hey, there's an intruder in the school. There was no code phrase, which we would discourage, but there was just no announcement that it had happened. So when we look at these recommendations to try to help with that on communications, schools should be equipped with panic alarms, preferably one that alerts the school and law enforcement simultaneously. Plans and training should not be based upon top-down alert. We want schools to have communication, but in order to communicate a threat, you have to know the threat's there, you have to be able to communicate it, and you have to have that first-hand knowledge. The people that have first-hand knowledge, in this case, was that school administrator that was in the main office when the window was shot out. Well, while she had first-hand knowledge, she was not in a position to communicate. So don't be dependent upon communication. Communication's critical. We need to get law enforcement there, but realize that it's going to be a failure point, and if it takes a minute to get that communication made, a lot of people can be hurt in 1 minute. When you have the opportunity in school, select command posts. Try to find a way to manage the incident. This can provide, from a relatively secure location, the ability to communicate inside the school what they know, and the ability to view your video. If you have on-site video and on-site intercoms, make sure they are co-located in a couple of locations that could be used. All too often, the only school-wide intercom is in the main office. That might not be the best place. The thought being, if someone is then able to get to a secure location, they can be on the phone with 911, looking at video as a backup to 911 being able to look at it, saying, I'm looking at the video, I see there's one shooter. Being on the intercom and telling staff, he's heading towards the cafeteria, evacuate through the kitchen. It's okay that the shooter hears that. Use it as a way to provide real-time information. Practice that in your drills. Doesn't have to scare the kids. It can be, Mr. Spicer, I see you walking down the hallway to the cafeteria. That's an opportunity for your law enforcement to practice their remote login. But practice that stuff. It can save seconds and minutes. So still on intruder response. So their lockdown plan failed to mitigate the attack. I will tell you, no indication that anything anyone on that school did saved one life. And that was not their intent. It just was the way it worked out. They did not provide an analysis at the state level of their plans. Was able to get a redacted version of their emergency plan. It made a section to unknown persons or intruders and it references lockdown, but it doesn't give any more guidance or detail. And there's no indication that their drills did anything different other than the standard, okay, it's time to do our drill, lock your doors, turn off your lights, great job, go back to teaching. The principal and the school psychologist were in a meeting with a parent when the window was shot out in the main office. They entered the hallway and were shot dead. And it's really hard to fault that. They hear something, they're not sure what's going on, there's a commotion, they both enter the hallway, and they were confronted with the killer with a rifle in a hallway in close proximity, and he shot them both down. It's hard to say they shouldn't have gone out into the hallway at that point. They just didn't know what was going on. And again, I don't fault the person in the front office for not making that announcement. We would say that, you know, if you do have to run, it's okay to scream and make that announcement however you can, alert others when you can. Talked about the students that survived. 9 students who fled classroom, 10 survived. Those were the only people that were in classrooms 8 and 10 that lived. Everyone else that was in there died. Not suggesting that if every one of those rooms would have run, no one would have died. It's just not realistic, but it certainly would have been more challenging. We're working on a project for the active shooter part of our training where we're actually going out on a range, because I know there's a lot of law enforcement and I know many of the school administrators in here shoot too. It's difficult for people that have never been with firearms to understand why run is such a great option. It's imperfect, but it's harder to shoot a moving target. And so we're actually going to try to make that demonstration. We see all too often these mass killings, you know, virtually point blank to 5 feet range of a stationary target. You're going to have a 100% hit rate, and out of that, you're going to have pretty close to a 100% fatality rate. Movement is harder. Typical classrooms are about 40 feet. Shooting in something from 5 feet to 40 feet is harder. Now make that target move, it's even harder. Now if I want to keep with that target as the shooter, what do I have to do? I have to move. So now I'm shooting at a running target while I'm trying to run with it. That's next level stuff. It doesn't mean no one gets hurt, but fewer people get shot, fewer people die. So witnesses also reported seeing staff fleeing ground floor windows during the attack. It looks like that was probably after the killer had committed suicide. Well, still not a bad action. What they did was really irrelevant. They were no longer in danger. Classroom 10, the teacher was found deceased in the room with a set of keys nearby. The assumption is the keys were on the floor, that she knew she needed to lock the door. That's what she'd been trained to do. She hadn't been trained in other options. Innovative thinking doesn't occur under combat conditions. And it was, do I open the door where I know the killer is or do I not? She obviously didn't, and I don't fault her for that. And he came in the room, and that's where she was killed. So after breaching the front door, the attack lasted approximately 273 seconds. We get that by going back from the first 911 call, 15 seconds, going up to a suicide. So might be off by a little bit, but we're pretty close. He fired 145 rounds. That does not include the 8 rounds he used to gain entry through the window and the 1 round he used to kill himself. So when the talks were about how the lockdown helped and he couldn't get into rooms that were locked, aside from the fact that there's no physical evidence or witness reports he went into the rooms, he didn't have time. You think about it, he shot out the window, and that's when our clock starts, and we have 273 seconds. He goes into the main office, he looked for targets, didn't find any. Went into the hallway, saw the principal and the psychologist, killed them, went back into the main office. We know that from the witness in there that he came back in. That's when she actually accidentally triggered the intercom system. Then he went back into the hallway, then he went into classroom 8, then he went into classroom 10, maybe not in that order, we'll never know, possibly more than once, and then he committed suicide. In 273 seconds at 6 locations at a minimum, firing 145 rounds at 28 different people. That's a pretty sustained rate of fire to say that he was going down the hallway checking doors. He was not. I don't think he was. I think he went into the 2 rooms he wanted to. The other thing I will tell you is, we used to have, and I say some people still do it, I don't want to say they're wrong, there used to be the perception of mass killers, their #1 goal was maximum body count. I do not believe that is the case. You look at Columbine, there were people they could have killed, they didn't. You look at Sandy Hook, he killed everyone he could, but I think he could have found more targets if he wanted to, but he had a fantasy about how many times he shot each person. He fired a lot of rounds into each person, even when they were obviously dead. That was part of what was in his mind. So he got to as many people as he wanted to, the amount of time he had, but he didn't try to get to more. So once again, plans and training need to have redundancy, command, and empower all staff to make those decisions. Going back to that OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act. That teacher needed to make the decisions, not wait for guidance from an intercom. She needed to be trained to do that. Once again, the run, hide, fight system. The barricade, blockade, tie off doors, figure out ways to make your classroom even harder to get into. We've got the cards, we'll show you those that kind of go, that summarize that. Law enforcement response, and this was probably, I mean, I don't know, it's tough to look at this data for days on end. I'm a 4th generation police officer. My brother's still a deputy over in Austin. I bleed blue, and I don't mean to be critical of the on-site law enforcement, but I think it's important that we have honest discussions so that it can be improved upon. Law enforcement did not enter the school until 5 minutes and 47 seconds after the first officer's arrival. The presence of bystanders likely impacted this. This is where video could play in. They saw bystanders had nothing to do with the attack. They were honestly just walking by and showed up at the school and started looking around. And the police officers that showed up went and arrested them. All indications are while gunshots were still going on inside the school. Not for a long period of time, but for some period of time. So the first 911 call was received at 9:35:39. That's a fact. We know that. We know from the video logs the first officer arrived at 9:39, dead even. Pretty good response time. From radio reports, their first entry, 5 minutes and 47 seconds later. Now, we do a lot of planning meetings. When we go in and do emergency planning with the district, one of the first things we'll do is sit down with public safety, do a joint planning meeting, and we'll talk about response time. I guarantee you that if Newtown would have been in a meeting and they would have said, how long is it going to take you to get there? You know, they might have been able to say, well, you know what, we're a little over 3 minutes, which is good. You know, I'll take that all day long. But I don't think they'd say it's going to take us 5 minutes to get in. It's training. Just like the teacher wasn't going to come up with innovative thinking on her training with her lock keys, they trained in that traditional response to active shooter, 3 to 5 person ad hoc tactical team, let's wait for other people and let's go in. And there was no deviation from that. Now, as a department, if you don't think you need deviation from that, that's a departmental decision. I will tell you, first officer engaged, solo programs, that to me is what law enforcement needs. It's hard for me to understand how we're telling teachers as a last resort, grab a chair and break that guy's arm when he's trying to reach through a vision panel, but we're telling police it's okay. His exact words were, I'm going to stage out back and wait for a posse. When we're telling, I mean, we've got to train our police to get in there and go. And I think those are decisions that need to happen throughout the communities. So once again, we look at Sandy Hook, you know, concept failure or application failure. I really approach this from the standpoint of it was a concept failure. It was a concept failure from the standpoint of lockdown was the best response. It was a concept failure from law enforcement that the response to active shooter doctrine developed post-Columbine is still the best way to deal with that situation. You know, we look at even from law enforcement the priorities of life. You know, you got hostages, you got citizen bystanders, you got the officer, you got the bad guy. So we've got to train a little bit differently. So we need to get that going. The lockdown concept requires, once again, indirect contact, that rapid notification, the ability to keep the bad guy away from you, and top-down command and control. This book, The Starfish and the Spider, has absolutely nothing in the world to do with active shooter response. I read it, talking to a terrorism expert on it. It's how a lot of terrorist cells operate now. You think about a starfish, it's got 5 legs, cut one off, it continues to live. You think about a spider, 8 legs, a head, cut the head off, it's dead. ICS is a great tool, and we really preach that, and that's okay, but ICS in a school setting initially is the spider. And if that head is not functional, it's not going to work. We need to train our schools to work a little bit more like a starfish until someone can take over. Once top-down command and control has been established, that's great. They should follow instructions. When law enforcement's there, they're in command, follow their instructions. But when that initial accident happens, we need to have those teachers making decisions because that's our fastest response. We shouldn't have to wait for information to flow up the chain and then flow back down to everybody else. Matt's got some cards we'll pass out. I certainly have plenty of time for questions on Sandy Hook, and then I'll just take a few minutes to kind of show what we do. But no, it's a lot of information about the report. Be happy to share anything that been able to uncover. Yes, sir.
I just want to see if we can get that report sent to us.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I'll send it to through HCDE and send that out, yeah. I sent it to several that are part that we've been working with before. I'd be happy to send that out. Yes, sir.
Kids that ran from classroom 10, were they instructed to do so or not?
We don't know. We don't know. The kids, no one, I did not have access to interview with the kids, and I don't need it. So when I say we don't know, someone might know. Was not in the report. I talked to some law enforcement officers that were there. They didn't know. And now you talk about witness, those kids, we don't want them to relive it. And so, but yeah, it's a great thing. They actually, once they got out, they actually went to neighbors' houses. They didn't all go to the same place. And every child, all 9 of them were found within, a short period of time.
Did they go through the adjoining classroom, or did they go out the main hall?
They went out the main hall while he was
Going.
based on available information, and it could be wrong, while he was in there shooting people, they ran. And so that's why, once again, I say that, we could, some people still would have got shot, but I think more could have lived if more ran. So, yes?
What grade are these kids? It's like
First.
first grade?
Yep. Yes?
The handgun, the SafePlans using, is that like a 15 clip, 18 clip?
I don't remember it was a Glock 10 millimeter, if I remember right, pretty sure on that. I don't know how many rounds were actually in the magazine, but he did not use that. The only handgun round that was fired was to take his life.
So he used the AR-15?
Yes, it was the rifle. The 5.56 rounds were used to shoot through the door and to kill everybody else.
There's a report out, I think it just came out yesterday about how the parents and nobody actually responded to the kids' big issues.
Boy, absolutely. Yeah, I think it was it's recent that it was out.
Yesterday it came out.
And it had some good information. One of the things was that the education system as a whole coddled him and failed to address the issues, and probably. He went to Sandy Hook, I'm going off memory, I think it was his 4th grade and part of his 5th grade year, and that was the last contact he had with him. So while certainly the education system as a whole missed warning signs, that school did not. But yeah, and his mom, if there was one person in the world that was not surprised at what he was doing, I would say it was his mom right before he killed her. I mean, she just was...
She denied him. What I was reading, she had denied him any kind of medical assistance. After, I think his father tried to do it years before, but then it got cut off.
Yep, yeah, she, when he was diagnosed with a pretty severe form of autism, she denied that, refuted it, didn't want him treated for it, and he was also, and it just shows his mental state, he was 6'1" or 2", weighed 112 pounds at his death. He was anorexic. I mean, he was just obsessed with it to the point that this is speculation, what I see from it, to the point where he wasn't eating. That's all he could think about. And once it, the training we talked about, there's a thing called Menninger Triad. Menninger was a psychiatrist. 3 violent wishes of man: a wish to die, which is suicidal; a wish to kill, which is homicidal; a wish to be killed, which is victim precipitated homicide; suicide by cop. More wishes that are present, the worse it is. Once the brain starts obsessing, I'm not saying intervention could, but it was, from his standpoint, inevitable he was going to go down that road. And, that struggle he had, he just overcame it, and that became his obsession. And if that mom wasn't willing to come forward, because he was kind of a recluse at that point, he did make some practice runs. They had his GPS. He had driven by Sandy Hook a couple of times. They didn't give the full routes. He probably drove by some other places. But those trial runs were not going up and testing the doors by any indication of the report. It was just the GPS logs in his car. That for some period of time, that was his sole passion in life, was researching mass killings, and Nietzsche, whoever fights monsters. I mean, it just got to the point where that's what he was obsessed with.
So actually, the only connection that Sandy Hook had with this individual was that it was close by, and that he had been by there he had attended as a child.
Yeah.
So he could have actually walked into mall or anywhere and done that.
Yeah, there was no, from the evidence, there was nothing that
just
made
happened to
that
be a
target
school.
stand out. It's not unlike the Amish school
Right.
in Pennsylvania. It was the target of opportunity. You know, he didn't, Dave Grossman's got that great line, if these guys wanted a gunfight, they go to the police department and they give them a gunfight. He didn't want a battle, he didn't want anything other than to kill people, and that was his easiest target, so he picked the path of least resistance. And if he'd done any research, and that's why I don't think he ever tested the doors got locked at 9:35-ish. If he would have showed up 5 minutes before that, those kids were all in the gymnasium waiting to go to their classes. So a little bit of research on his end, there would have been no compartmentalization, door locked or not. He could have walked right through the front door, right into the gymnasium, and had more targets and not have to move from place to place. So I'm not saying it was spontaneous on his end. He might have been surprised the door was locked. Might not have been. There's arguments both ways. If he did, he overcame it pretty quickly by deciding to shoot up.
You made a comment stating that now it looks like it's not number of casualties, it's starting to look
It's
more
unique.
like this.
It's unique. Each killer's unique. So some, like Chow at Virginia Tech, he wanted to kill as many people as he could. The Aurora Theater shooter, kill as many people as he could. Columbine, they were in that school for 49 minutes. They could have killed more kids if they wanted to. I'm not suggesting that was magnanimous on their part. They wanted to terrorize people, and they had selective targets. In this case, I think that he wanted to kill a lot of people, but his fantasy was more in how he killed them as opposed to how many he killed. Because the autopsy reports, and we don't have the full reports, and I don't want them, we have the general information, firing a lot of rounds into each kid when they're obviously dead. Just out. So his fantasy was overkilling as many people as he could versus just flat out going around shooting. To have 28 people shot and 26 people die, 92% fatality rate at that number of shootings, you think about it. Law enforcement, military, we tell people 85% of the people that get shot live. You know, in this case, and yeah, it's the young kids, and I'm not suggesting those kids should have fought back or been told to fight back, but he was proximate to them. There was no resistance, and he had all the time in the world for those people he tried to kill.
You know, unfortunately, following the Sandy Hook report, it's still difficult to get school administrators and superintendents to understand the importance of locking classroom doors. You know, it's a challenge because it's convenient, you know, for them to walk into a classroom, and if it's convenient for the administrator to walk in, it's convenient for anyone who have an ill will to create an issue on campus to do the same. You know, we opened school this year, and having my administration to understand, we can no longer allow the parents to walk kids to classrooms on the first week and the first days of school. We've got to identify common areas and allow for kids to be dropped off. And I understand with public schools, but in order to ensure that all of our kids are safe, we've got to start putting plans in place to restrict where and how outsiders have access to our facilities. You know, demonstrating, first day of school, I walk onto a campus, I see a female, I walk up and I have a conversation, and I walk right into school with her. Because I look like a part of a family. That takes place, and I mean, those are the things that we have to prepare for. We've got to get administrators to understand the importance of, you've got to listen to your local law enforcement, whether that be municipal, school district, or county. You've got to listen to the experts.
I couldn't have said better. I don't want to drag you down to my level, but what I tell superintendents is, if you want your math scores up, I'm not your guy. I cannot help you there. But if you want the campus safer, we can do it. And there should be a sign in every school administrator's office that says security is never convenient. You know, it's just, they don't go together.
I pose this question to them often, what does safety and security have in common with convenience? And most of the time the audience ponder over that. And I conclude that absolutely not. But we're willing to compromise.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Is there anything in the reports about how he was able to gain access to the weapons that he used?
He had unrestricted access to the weapons that he used through his mom. So whether they were sometimes locked in the house, always, but it just, he had easy access to firearms.
Didn't he have a lot of, wasn't he using a lot of games or a lot of, was he involved in that stuff also? Do you
Not
know?
that I recall.
I thought that he
It
was
could
down in
be.
his basement doing that, or maybe that was another one.
Yeah, but he did a lot of research on killings. You know.
Did he actually try the front door?
Don't know. If he did, and, you know, that's another thing, people were talking about his level of autism, that he was, you know, not fully functional in a lot of terms. He overcame that pretty quickly. From a locked door, I mean, you know, it's not rocket science, but you would have to think that your adrenaline's up, you know. That works out great. Please keep eating. I'm just going to kind of explain what we do. When we first started working with HCDE, it was really more focused on the intruderology, which is a big part of our company, but most of what we do is all hazards emergency planning. We've got a software system that works with that. Now, we partner with HCDE, meaning that they are the ones that will, you know, take the lead on these implementations, and we'll support them. So they're a great partner. So we have software, and I know some of the districts have used HCDE for their safety audits, and that's great. Our system's on the back end. So anything that we're talking about here as far as SafePlan services, we partner with the center here, and they'll take the lead. The software I developed has really expanded. It started just to be the site mapping, and what we looked at when I developed the software, we wanted a high-tech to no-tech solution to help with emergency plans, site assessments, site mapping, online training. So we really focused on something that was available in an emergency, not just using technology. So that's why everything that we have is available in a PDF as well. So that way we realize in emergencies, technology can get interrupted. So it's available. We've got mobile apps. I'll show you that. Your plans can be in a mobile app. We've got everything that you can run off a thumb drive. But the emergency plans, the assessments, the site mapping data also gets generated into a PDF. So that if you can't get up to a computer, you can't get online, you've got an offline solution, which is really important. You know, it's not just an active shooter solution, it's all hazards. We went with Homeland Security. We got designated as a qualified anti-terrorism technology. We realized schools are not at the greatest risk of terrorism. We work with other than schools too, but that's the highest designation that Homeland Security offers. They don't have an all hazards preparedness solution. So we went through about a year-long process with U.S. Homeland Security. We can't put their Safety Act logo on our stuff to say that it's gone through that. They looked at it from an IT standpoint, how it's hosted, the data protection. They also looked at it from an operational standpoint. Does it do what it's supposed to do? And ultimately they came down that it does. So anyway, it integrates all this information from emergency plans, safety audits, site mapping, floor plans, digital information about the site, online training courses into one area. Kind of go over that. So it can help, and then it helps that integrate that response. I talked earlier about how schools are the true first responders, but we want law enforcement to be able to get there so they can both access information that's vital to them simultaneously if they don't already know it. So typically for the schools, the things that helps them the most is their plans and their training. Public safety needs information about where they're responding. On-site video, floor plans, digital images, so it can help with that. So if we have a scenario like a shooting at a school, the school response is going to be assisted through their emergency plans, through how they train, know where the non-secure areas are, special needs populations, and all that's available through the secure portal. So the district can be bringing information up to directing resources, handheld web devices, the mobile app. So all that information is available. With the mobile app, you know, it's right there. It doesn't have to be a binder back in the classroom, in the office. It's right there. The same plan that's online gets generated into the mobile app. The app works on Android, iPhone, iPads, mobile and tablet devices. And then it's also in a book. So we've got multiple levels of emergency plans that can be in the system. You can have your full emergency operations plan that might be 200 pages. You can also then generate quick reference guides that can go in each classroom, they can go in each school bus that are more than 12 to 15 page range. So that way you can have complementary plans. You don't have to have just an all or nothing. Public safety, while they're responding, we call it site level GIS. You know, being able to bring up floor plans, digital images, cameras, utility shutoffs, staff contact information, all through a secure system. So that way public safety is bringing that information up. They have that information available through the same areas. Secure portal, but also again the biggest one there is the PDF. You know, if we look at like a major weather event, if power lines are down, cell towers are down, our servers, we're geo-redundant, where our servers are gonna be up. Your ability to get to them might be compromised. That's why we want that information in a PDF book, so that you can still have that available to where you can flip through it. The emergency plans, it's where we're working with the center. You can have industry standard best practice plans. You can customize those, and at the district level, you can give the information to your schools. They log on and customize it. It's available online, in print, and in the mobile app. If you want to make a change to your district plan, maybe a new best practice identified, maybe new guidelines on Ebola needs to go out. You can make that change in one place, and it automatically updates all your school plans. They can then be alerted, hey, there's been a change made to your plan, you need to log on and do it. So now if you're having to manage emergency plans for a lot of sites, you can do it through one location. If you have the right permissions, you can make that change. You can track changes schools make. So that way, rather than each of your schools having their own Word plans, it's through a secure portal. That same information that's online dynamically updates the mobile app. So that way everything is consistent and synced. You don't have to do it separately. The safety audits that the center can go out and do, we've got a safety audit module here. So you can go in and your safety audits can be done that way. At the district level, you can track what's been entered. You can look at that information, maintain it, share it, make comments. The apps can be completed through mobile, the assessments can be completed through mobile apps. So that way those safety audits don't just become a once every 3-year process. It can be a living document. You can go back and refer to that. You can run analytics on it. So that way you've got the ability to look at information throughout that timeline. So once again, you know, we work with the center on these, so they'll be out, you know, they can go out and do the surveys. The information can then be viewed. The principal of the school or the administrator of the school can see the results, make comments. At the district, you can see what those are and have a corrective action planning process. The online training, so that's where we have a learning management system. We have the intruder response courses, the intruderology courses, but we also have courses, an all hazards course for school employees. You know, the teacher's course that doesn't just talk about intruder, but talks about fire, severe weather, all the different elements, so that way they can do it. You can track this learning. We try to keep our courses around 20 minutes or less for rapid learning. You know, it's tough to do it. We have some that go a little longer if it's needed, but we want to keep people's attention. We want to hit the topic, and then we want to be able to track it. So if you have a new substitute teacher, how are you going to make sure that they understand their role in an emergency? They can take a 20-minute online course, they get a certificate, you have proof that they took the training. We've got it for bomb threats, how to develop evacuation plans, severe weather guidelines, all the way down to threat assessment, how to do behavioral analysis. So those online training courses are training on demand. The site mapping is where we can help police and fire respond even faster to an event. This is where we can take that site level data, consolidate it in one place so that if something happens, they can bring that up. You know, we have the floor plans, you know, aerial images, exterior photographs of the school, interior photographs for navigation. All this also gets generated in a PDF. So it's geo-coded and it's got a cross-reference. So if you're looking at a photograph, you can see where it was taken in the school, actually in print. So that way, if we've got someone tactical on the scene, whether it's fire or law enforcement, they can be communicating with the dispatcher and they can be looking at the site. This can help reduce those response times. The dispatcher can be bringing this up. That 911 call comes in. We can code in there what your access control measures are. We want you to have access control in your school, but realize as you put that security film on your windows to keep the bad guy from being able to break it out, if that metal door is locked and that police officer has to get into school, you've also delayed his ability to bust out that window and get in the school if he doesn't have a key. So if there's electronic access control, Knox boxes, keys, the dispatcher can have that available, so while law enforcement's en route, the dispatcher can be on the phone and say, hey, we've got shots fired in the cafeteria, your best entrance to park at is here, here's your best way to get in. That's saving seconds. We don't expect the police officer getting out of his car looking at a mobile data terminal. Maybe it's coming down the road and we'll integrate with Google Glasses, but you know, we're 10 years out on that. Right now we want to keep it simple. Dispatchers looking at it, they're communicating to the police officer. If it turns into a hostage situation, which takes longer, okay, then the SWAT team can be looking at all the detailed diagrams and all that's in there. If it's a severe weather incident and the building's damaged, well, fire and rescue can start their search based on your designated shelters. You know, if a building's been hit and impacted by a tornado and there's significant damage, and I gotta start looking for people, I'm gonna start with the shelter locations. How do I know where they're at? Okay, here's a floor plan of what the school used to look like, here's the geocodes, now we know where to start our search and rescue operations instead of just winging it. Hazardous material release. Where are the utility shutoffs? How do I shut down HVAC? All that's available online, one secure place, it's available. One of the neatest features for school administrators, especially when you got a lot of schools, is our status board. So with this, you can track what's going on. As the school completes one of these key areas, plans, assessments, mapping, training, their status board changes. So at a glance, you can look at it, and you can drill back down if you need to. You can say, okay, I'm going to click on this school. Why are their plans yellow? Those questions are customizable by you. So maybe it's a training issue. Maybe one of the things in your plan is you just flat out ask them, do you understand how to respond to a violent intruder incident? Do you understand how to respond to a severe weather incident? Well, if they answer no, it's going to turn them yellow. Their plan might be completed, but you got a training issue. So you can use it as a tool to collect information about where they're at. The site data, is it accurate? To me, on site data, no information is better than bad information. We don't want to have a floor plan online or on file at a police department and have someone going down a hallway think they're going to the right place, only to find out it's no longer accurate. So that's where that can come into play. Have you reviewed this? Is your site information current and up to date? Do you have a printed version in your school? So that way if something happens, do you have a printed version at the district? So that status board, at a glance, instant feedback of the readiness level of each school based on what they've been doing. The other services we offer with HCDE is the training programs, the knowledge transfer. I know that some of you have gone through the intruderology training. We can also go and work with you, through the center on how to update your emergency plans using the software. When we do that, it's a process of, okay, here's how you use the software. That's about 20 minutes, but it's more about the strategies behind the emergency plan. Incident command system is going to say every emergency should have a command post. We talked about in the Sandy Hook about how you should have a active shooter or violent intruder command post. Well, you need one for severe weather, you need one for a fire. Help the principal understand why these command posts are important and where they should be at, so that if they don't have that plan with them, they're now making those decisions. We're teaching strategies, not, hey, here's how you turn to a page, here's how you click on a button. We want them to understand the why. So a lot of that training is understanding how to maintain emergency plans, and that way it's a more sustainable process. We certainly don't recommend saying, hey, have SafePlans write your emergency plan for each school and turn it over to your school. Well, no, it's not going to get read. We want your educators and administrators to be actively involved in that process. It's more sustainable and it's more effective. We offer site mapping services where we'll go in, make sure your floor plans are accurate, take all the photographs, catalog all the information about your cameras, AEDs, fire alarms, access control information, have that available. The safety audits through the center, they can go out and do the security assessments and the safety audits. The intruderology training. Another thing that's really as important as those tabletop exercises to test the plan. An untested plan is theory. We don't want to have to wait for an emergency, so what we like to do is be able to go in there and test that in a reasonable way. Let's do a real quick demo here, see if we're still online. Yeah, real quick. So we can have any number of levels of information on these. For this, we've got just a very basic location management, to where right now for Harris County we've got the whole region. But as you can see, we work with several states to where they implement this statewide, and we can get all the way down to the school level. So at the district, you're able to see this information. You can bring up all the different data points about the school, floor plans, digital imagery, everything's available through a simple interface. The PDF is available, so you can download print information. The emergency plans, based on what the center's looked at for the region here, we can have the emergency plans for each location. So the plan, doesn't matter how long an area determines the plan needs to be. That's based on best practices. When you look at the 2013 guidelines from FEMA, it gets pretty detailed. You know, so what we've been able to do then is go in and say, okay, we're also gonna have quick reference guides. So we still have the full plan that's needed. Now we've got a much more consolidated plan. Once again, it's available as a PDF download for print, can go in each classroom, we can stagger the pages if that's what you want. But that way you've got a living document. If the district or the region wants to make an update, we can make a change to the template, that impacts all the schools. So if you've got 5 schools or 500, make a change at one location and updates. The same information that's in this here updates your mobile app. So the mobile app has the emergency contacts. Just to this way. So whether it's on a tablet or anything else, you've got, I know it's kind of hard to see those, the screen's not coming in. So your emergency plans, the general instructions, whatever's in your plan, however many items you have, we've got that. Contacts in the plan by your staff contact numbers or your public safety or both. So as many teams as you have, we've got that information available. So that way you're able to go in. So you update your staff crisis team, that's in your app. Now you've got all that managed in its own contact section. So you need to send a message to your safety team, it's right there in your app. You need to contact someone, it's there. You need to make a call to public safety and you can't remember the number, you don't have to search through all your contacts. It's managed right there in it. Your assessments can all be managed right in the same app. So that way you can go out, you can view the information, you can upload comments, you can upload photographs. All that's available right there at the fingertips. So that way we've gone away from the more antiquated version of, go to your office, look for the binder, to have it right there with them in their smartphone. So however your emergency plans are set up, that information goes to the mobile app. So covered quite a bit there. Appreciate the opportunity to go over that. I mean, I was glad that it was during lunch because I hate to waste people's time with the sales pitch, so appreciate your attention. If you have any questions, we'd be happy to go in more detail, but Matt is here, he has business development for us. We can certainly do a demo, let the center know anything we do with you guys here works with them, so contact either one of us and we'd be happy to do that. We're able to offer some pretty aggressive pricing because of our partnership with the center for this region, so if it's something you might be interested in, certainly let us know. And once again, appreciate your time and it was great to be back. So.